Hello, folks. Killface of Baylor here. Sorry if I sound a little strange. I'm a little bit sick today. I am doing a video that I've been dreading a little bit because there's a lot of information and I want to be efficient with covering it. You can see from the time on the video whether I was or not. And today we're talking about DPS, what it is, how to calculate it, that sort of thing. Oh, right. I need to mute my chats because otherwise we're going to have all kinds of weird things popping up in general that are distracting. Okay. So, first of all, what is DPS and how is it different from damage? Oops, stats. My damage stat is 40 right now. My DPS is far, far above 40. We're going to cover skill DPS first, and DPS means damage per second. My damage is not calculated into my skills as a mage. Many skills for melee classes, which oddly in this game includes ranger. If you hear people say melee, they mean normally ranger and warrior and rogue. Casters would be druids and mages, although there is technically a druid auto build that works. Anyway, the damage of a given skill, right? So let's cast Isotune first. If I were to throw Firebolt, it's not boosted by my Isotune. I'm an ice mage, but hey, I have Firebolt, so let's throw it. Let's look at what it does. It does 4,000 damage, and see how quickly it cools down. Right, so I have a 15% CDR on Firebolt right now, and I have a 25% on Ice Blast, and I have a 25% on Ice Shards. But normally, this is a 7-second cooldown and a 0-second cast time, insta-cast. It doesn't interrupt my autos, doesn't do any of that. And we'll go ahead and auto attack, and you'll see that I should end up hitting it for, yeah, there you go. You can see me hitting it for 37 damage there. So this is why I don't auto, because in order to get the most out of my DPS, I have very low auto attacks. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Okay. So DPS on a skill like Firebolt is that 7 seconds, right? Times the it's the damage from Firebolt divided by 7, the number of seconds, right? So we take that 3855 or whatever, and we divide it by 7. And another thing you can do is to go in and look at your stat page and do that same thing. 3978. Now, that wolf has 0 resists, which is why I'm hitting so high. So we take 3978, we divide it by 7, right? So we get, what, 5.5-ish? So about 550 DPS. For those of you who actually did the math on that, I apologize that I wasn't quite right. But we're going to get roughly 550 DPS. Let's run away. So there we go. Now, with a skill like Ice Shards, let's throw some Ice Shards here. Oh, I'm sorry. I made a mistake with. You'll see this cools down much slower, and also when I throw it, there's a blue thing. I made a mistake with Firebolt. You can't just read the stat like I did. And hopefully this shards will help us. You saw I hit for a little over 10k there. If we look at my shards, my damage is far under 10k. The way that happens is that I have this 6,255 damage plus this, right, which is 540. So what? 95, 67, 95. There we go. So 6795 plus this, which is 700 more, plus this, which is 700 more again, 1400, and 900 is 2300 on top of the 67 we had. Is that right? Yeah. So roughly 9,000-ish. Plus, now we swap this in because when we threw it, we had it swapped in. This 2,000 here. Right, so that gets us up to roughly 11.5 thousand. Now, ice shards should take roughly 17 seconds to cool down, or 15 seconds to cool down, plus 1 second cast time, that blue thing that went around. The 1 second cast time doesn't get reduced by my 25% cooldown skull, but the 15-second cooldown does. So we ignore the cast time. We go, all right, so normally we would do damage of ice shards, which is roughly 11.5k, divided by 16 seconds. This time we're going to go divided by 3/4 of 15 seconds, right? Because a quarter of my cooldown reduction of my cooldown is reduced. So we're going to take 11.5 divided by 3/4 of 15, which is 10.5 or something along those lines. Yeah, that's right. All right, so divided by roughly 10.5-ish, plus the 1 second still, right? So 11.5-ish. That's easy. So I have 1,000 DPS roughly from my ice shards. Now, so my ice shards does roughly twice the damage that my firebolt does. However, watch this. How long is my delay from the cast time of firebolt? The answer is it's not. There isn't one. Now watch this, right? Now watch as I hit ice shards, how long it takes me to even be able to do my hot swap, or ice blast, sorry, in order to throw firebolt. Now what happened there is my firebolt I could have been throwing the whole time, right? Sorry, I'm hitting the wrong buttons. Again, I'm sick. And I don't have to delay at all. Now, once these are all cooled down at the same time, I need to remember to prioritize the ones that cast the fastest most of the time. I can afford the 1 second of delaying firebolt if I need to for ice shards. However, it's better to throw firebolt first because it doesn't delay the other skills at all. I don't have to take that out. But if firebolt was cooled down and I threw ice blast, I need to take 3 seconds or roughly half of my firebolt damage off of the DPS of that cast. I don't know if all that makes sense. It's kind of complicated. But the way you figure out your DPS is how often you cast, how many seconds between each cast, right? And divide that into the total damage. So Ice Blast, which is a very hard-hitting skill, if I have everything set up for it, right? Oh, come on. Really? There we go. So my Ice Blast here is going to tend to hit... Okay, well, that was lame. But normally it's going to tend to hit pretty high, right? And what I'm going to have to do is take... Okay, so I'm going to take this 7,000 damage. I'm going to add on to it this damage here, the 2,500 from earlier, because I don't have that attune ring equipped, right? So roughly 9.5-ish for those of you keeping track. I apologize that my math is wrong here, but I'm trying to show you how to do this quickly in your head. It's not super important that you're exact unless you already have top gear. I'm more trying to get people to be able to do this calculation. For those of you who already know how to do it perfectly, you don't need my help. Okay, so then you take the 600 Ice Blast damage from these pants, you add that to your 2,500, right, to get 31, and you add your 31 to your 7K, And then we also have a ring here. Yeah, there you go. And we add 900-ish to our whole equation there. And that's how we start to see how much damage Ice Blast is doing. And you see I have a cooldown reduction. Now, the problem here is that Ice Blast casts once every 25 seconds, but it has a 3-second cast time right there, which does not get reduced by my bracelet, which means if I want to take off 25%, I don't get to take off 7 seconds, right? The 3-second cast time plus the 25-second cooldown. I only get to take off 25% of the 25-second cooldown, which honestly I'm not totally certain off the top of my head what that is. So 25 times 25 is 6.25. So it must be 6.25 seconds that I get to subtract instead of 7. So I lose 3/4 of a second out of that cast time. So point being, my cooldown for fire, if I were to have 25% cooldown for Firebolt, it would actually do a better job than the 25% cooldown for Ice Blast. I can't speak, sorry. And anyway, that is worth noting because despite the fact that this skill hits hard, right? Right, so as we looked at before, you have 7,000-ish plus, you see I did the hot swap so I don't have to, there we go. So 7.6, 9.6, I'm doing this quickly on purpose, 9.6 plus this here is 600 is 10.2 plus, let's call it 900, is 11.1. So roughly, we have somewhere around 11,000 damage, which when we did the calculation for ice shards, we noticed that it did about double the damage of my Firebolt. When we do that same calculation, we take the 11.1, 11.2, whatever we came to, of Ice Blast, and we look at the fact that we have 28 seconds minus 6.25, right, which is 21.25. Now we have to divide the 11,000 by 21, roughly, right? 11,000 plus a little divided by 21 plus a little. And you're going to end up basically dividing it in half again, and you're going to end up with close to the same damage between Ice Blast and Firebolt, even though I don't have Firebolt boosting gear for the most part, and I do have Ice Attune, right? And that's not entirely true. I actually have Firebolt gear here and Firebolt gear here. Right, so I have 400 to Firebolt, plus 500 to Firebolt is 900, plus this ring, so what am I, okay, let's try and do this correctly. So there's another 270, we have 1100, 1200 direct damage somewhere in there, but it pales in comparison to what we have in Ice Blast, and still Ice Blast is comparable, but not great. So I always want to prioritize Firebolt, because if I have both of them empty and I cast Firebolt, well, it doesn't delay my Ice Blast at all. And as you've seen, if I cast Ice Blast first, it does delay my Firebolt. See, and now I get to use Firebolt twice, so even though it's hitting half as hard, it's actually keeping up just fine in DPS. Right? And here's where it gets odd. This is close. I want to make sure that I do that one first. Right? There you go. Okay, so that's a general idea of how DPS works with skills. The next thing to consider is how DPS works with auto attacks. When I start auto attacking, I can throw this, and my autos should come at the same speed. Right? Now, I have a slow weapon on. This is probably bad example, but this shouldn't slow down the delay between my auto attacks. See how I attack right afterwards? This, on the other hand, will slow it down just fine. I just canceled that auto attack, and then I wait for 3 seconds, and then there's the rest of the animation for it, right? And these, because they have a cast time, can cancel out an auto attack. And that time it actually finished casting the auto in order to delay the Ice Blast, or that's what it looked like to me. Anyway, if you accidentally cancel an auto with your spell attack, you need to subtract the amount of damage done by that auto attack from your spell attack. The damage you would have done from the auto attack needs to be subtracted from your spell attack. And my autos are really low, so I don't normally auto attack. And the other reason is, watch this. If I auto attack, let's see. This is a skull actually. So okay, so there's my range with auto attack. Let's see if I outrange it with. Nope. Ice shards is equally small amount of range. Okay. Sorry, notification popped up. If we take something like a wand and we attack again, see how close I have to be? Normally I could be attacking from here. But as soon as I do this, I run in closer, which means if the boss has area of effect, I get hit by it. If the boss has a cloak, I'm hitting them for 40 damage and they're hitting me for 400 or something. So that's why I don't auto attack as a mage. But if you're a rogue or a ranger or a warrior, where your auto attacks get taken into account by some of your skills, where a lot of your skills are instant cast, where they're not interrupting your auto, in the case of a rogue, and where your skills are hitting for thousands of damage, or your autos are hitting for thousands of damage, then you want your auto attack. And the thing you want to look for with your auto attack is both your damage stat. See, my damage is a little higher because I have a wand, different wand. And your attack stat. Your attack stat gets compared to the boss's defense stat for your auto attack's likelihood of landing. And you don't have that issue with skills. Your skills, their evasion stat gets compared with your ability stat. So like my fire magic controls how likely my firebolt is to hit, but it's not as straight of a comparison as attack and defense. So raising my fire magic doesn't actually raise my chance to hit as much as raising my attack raises my chance to hit with autos. So if you are a melee class, you want that attack stat to be somewhere in the 10 to 15,000 range, because bosses have such a high defense that otherwise many of your attacks are going to miss. Whereas while you're leveling, your average opponent will probably still be susceptible to 3,000 to 5,000 attack. That will be enough to land most of your auto attacks, because if only half of them are going to land, then it doesn't matter whether you're canceling them out or not. Half of them are going to land anyway. And the ones that miss don't go into your DPS calculation. So if you're only going to hit half the time, cut your damage stat in half to see what your auto DPS is. And the reason we care about damage per second is, let's say we're in a 10-minute long boss fight and you hit with Ice Blast for 60,000 damage, right? I've seen critical Ice Blast that high, and you can see that on the leaderboards. That's nice. Well, if you can hit for 60,000 and over the course of 10 minutes you throw it once every 30 seconds plus an extra one, say, right? So you got 21 casts in there, but you were hitting also with Firebolt for a 15,000 critical for whatever reason, and assuming you critical at the same rate, which you should, you're going to cast roughly 4 times as many Firebolts. And if you have equal cooldown for both of them, it's actually going to lean slightly in favor of Firebolt, as discussed earlier. So let's say that you manage to cast now 84 plus, say you have 25% cooldown, right? So you get another couple Firebolts on top, and you hit, your for 86 or 87 times instead of 21. It's nice that you hit higher with the Ice Blast, but Ice Blast didn't do as much damage over the course of the raid, and if you prioritize Ice Blast over Firebolt, you lose total damage that you could have put out at the end. To that end, do not use builds on bosses that have both Firestorm and Ice Blast. You want to use whichever one matches your attunement, and you can only use one attunement because they cancel each other out. Fire and Ice attune. They're just not worth it without the boost from attunements. And yes, Firestorm and Ice Blast both hit multiple opponents if you have multiple opponents, but you have multiple opponents such a low percentage of the time that it isn't worth taking into account except for special circumstances. And I'll leave you to kind of figure out what those are, but in general, you can ignore them and your life will be fine. So, yeah, that's that. As far as other things to consider, your attack speed of your weapon determines basically how long your cooldown is. Your cooldown reduction for your auto attacks is haste, a haste ring, something like that. But it's also, right, you can get weapons with various attack stats, attack speeds. See my video on how to read weapon stats if you want to get a better idea of how that all works. But yes, you can do a DPS increase to your autos by hasting or by using a faster weapon. So anyway, that's a general look at what DPS is and why we care more about DPS than damage. I hope that helped someone, and have a nice day. I'll see you in the next video.